Saul was scared. Well, to say that he was scared was, I'd probably say, was an understatement. Saul was terrified. Just the very fact of hearing the voice across the valley, was seeing how big Goliath was, that made Saul shake in his boots. Now, you see, from our perspective, Saul was probably around somewhere between 6 foot to 6'3". Now, Goliath was close to 10 feet tall. Saul at that time in Israel was considered extremely tall. But when he saw Goliath, he was afraid. Everything dropped by the side every time he heard Goliath's voice, every time he saw Goliath. He literally was petrified. He was so terrified because he didn't know what to do. Now, have you ever had a time like that? I'm sure there's a lot of times that you probably could mention where you felt so afraid that you didn't know what to do. God, through the Bible, reminds us that in these moments, we need to remember that He's with us and He's going to take care of us. Now, this is something that Saul and the rest of Israel forgot about. They forgot that God promised that He was going to be with us. Now, for us today, we can look back at a lot of these stories and say, well, if they had only, no, even we forget. This is why God has given us the Bible, so that we've got the promises right in front of us. And not just that, we have nothing to be afraid of, because God has promised that He's going to see us through. Now, He kept telling everybody else, hey, if we find the person that can kill Goliath, I will give them an amazing reward. No one wanted to do it. Night after night, day after day, afternoon after afternoon passed, and no one would do anything because they were so scared. Day came when, off in the countryside of Bethlehem, David's father called for him. David came in and he said, yes, Dad, what would you want? What do you want me to do? David's dad said, David, it's been a while since we've heard from your brothers. I know that they're off at battle, they're protecting Israel, they're doing what Saul has asked them to do, but still wonder what's going on. Would you go to the battlefield and check up on your brothers and then come back and give a report? Now, this was not something that was new. This was something that happened in every single family. Because during this time, in order for soldiers to survive, the families provided food and other things for them, where they would always check up on them every couple months so that they were able to survive the length of however long the war was going to be. So this was a normal time, but not really for David. David did other things, and he wasn't sent in this capacity. But with all of his brothers gone, probably everyone else was busy, and he was the only one that was able to do this. And so he packed up all the provisions in the cart and headed towards where the battle was going. Now, we don't know how long it could have taken. It could have taken a short time. It could have taken several days. It's not like our traveling today, where we can jump in a car or get on a plane or get on a boat or whatever, and we can get to places in a fairly short amount of time. Back then, because of the fact that they had to walk or go on a wagon or go on an animal, it took a lot longer for them to travel. So David's traveling. Let's say that it was a couple of days. He's traveling. He finally gets to where the battle is happening. And he hears Goliath speak. He sees the very expression on the Israelite army of being so terrified. And he looks and he sees the height of Goliath. And I'm sure David probably shook a little bit too, because he was pretty small at this time. And he went around asking people, Why doesn't someone stand up against this guy? And every answer that he got, oh no, no, we can't do this because he's so tall, he's so frightening. And did you hear his voice? Oh, that voice that can shake a tree down, that can echo through this valley. There is no way that we can do it. Not even Saul will stand up to this guy himself. Now, here's something that you need to understand. Back during this time, when it came to war, it wasn't two armies coming and fighting against each other. You chose your best fighter, and then those two went to the front lines, and whoever won that fight, that nation won the war, and the other nation was their captive. So, see, they wanted to make sure that their best warrior went up against Goliath. And even their best didn't feel like they could do it. So David kept challenging him. He's taking God's name in vain. He's speaking against our God, and no one's going to do anything? And they were very quiet about this. They didn't even want to try to acknowledge what David was suggesting. However, the word of this got to Saul, and Saul said, hey, I want you to go and get this guy. I want to see him myself. Now, he sent the best of his captains to go and get David, and when David came in to see Saul, Saul was puzzled for a couple reasons. Number one, when he saw David walk in, probably there was some light, so he couldn't see David's face to start with. So he sees this short guy, short in stature, coming in, and Saul is going, wait a minute, how can this guy go up against someone that's about 10 feet tall? There's no way. But as David walks into Saul's presence, Saul realizes who it is. Because David was known to come there to the palace on many occasions to play for Saul to help him with the bad moods that he got in. Now, something that's interesting about this is that music is a key in everything that goes on in life. It's been found out that music can actually even unlock certain areas of the brain to help you better listen to God. Now, when we're talking about music, we're talking about instrumental, we're talking about classical. We're not talking about things that are extremely heavy or things that pull us down. No, it's something that will be used to boist us up so that we're able to clearly listen to God. Now, David was playing his harp. That's what that did. And so Saul knew who David was. But at the same time, he's like, this guy's tall, you're short, you have no armor, you have no experience. This just doesn't match up. David didn't need to remind him about what he'd done in the past, but he does do this, and we see this from the Bible where David says, Saul, I fought a lion, I fought a bear, and I killed them both. Now, back during that time, it was by a sling, not a slingshot, a sling. Something, and people in the Middle East actually still use these, where it's strips of leather, or a strip of leather, with a larger part in the center where the stone would be located. Stone would be placed there, you'd hold both tightly together, and then you'd swing it around your head, and you'd let one part go, and then the stone would fly in that direction that it's let go. David shared this with him, and Saul knew what it was because he was a shepherd himself once upon a time. But what's interesting with this is that Saul had forgotten where his power, where his authority came from. Too often in life, that's what happens to us. We forget how God has led us in the past. And because of that, we forget that he's leading us now, and he's leading us into the future. But David shares all this for a specific point, letting Saul know that it's God that's on his side, and God is the one that's going to win the victory in the end. Now, while it really didn't convince Saul, it did say that David was willing to fight, and Saul couldn't get away from that because he knew if he said no, the Israelites would say, well, why didn't you let him? So he says, well, okay, I'll let you. However, I've got a condition that I'm going to make that you need to follow in order to be able to go and fight. Condition is this: you have to wear my armor. Now, at this point in time, David might be around somewhere between 5 foot to 5'4". He's short. Saul's armor is not going to fit David. They try to put him on it. There's no way he can move. And David finally looks at Saul and says this: now, Saul, king, I can't fight in your armor. I have to fight my own battle with what I have. This is going to be too heavy and we would have no chance. So I can imagine Saul looking at him and saying, well, what are you going to do? David says, well, I'm going to do what I always do. I'll take my stick, I'll take my sling, and we'll go from there. Saul was probably thinking in the back of his mind, this is a very crazy kid. There is no way that he's going to win. Something I want to remind you of right now is that it's at the moments when it seems the most difficult that God is doing amazing things, and he's already promised you the victory even before the battle has started. So David says goodbye to Saul. He starts walking through the camp, which there were probably whispers already about what David was about to do. And he goes down to the creek, and if you remember the song about David, it mentions that he picks up 5 smooth stones. Now, it's not that David was planning on missing. It's the very fact that David knows that Goliath has 4 other brothers, and David is preparing for battle. Now, that's something that God wants to remind us continually on right now, is that we need to be continually prepared for what is ahead. Now, we don't have to make all these plans. We need to put it in God's hands, knowing that what he's doing, what he's saying, will come to pass. But he prepares. He picks up those 5 stones, places them in his rock bag. Carrying his staff, carrying his sling, he starts walking up the hill. And as probably even before he starts walking up the hill, as he's at the stream, I'm sure that Goliath notices. And Goliath was known to notice every little thing. And he notices the stick, he notices the rocks, he notices the sling. Goliath starts laughing, a laugh that would reverberate all around the valley. And he focuses on David, at the same time pushing up his helmet. And he says, who do you think you are, little boy, coming at me with sticks and stones? What, do you think I'm a dog that you would come at me like this? Here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to make things easy. I'm going to win this fight fast. Now I can imagine the moment that David hears that, the moment that Goliath stops talking with that sentence, David starts into an immediate run, grabs a stone out of his bag, places it in his sling, and starts to rotate it round and round and round. Goliath, thinking that he doesn't need anything, probably just grabs his spear, getting ready to pin David to the ground. David runs faster and faster and faster, and then he lets loose his sling, and the stone goes flying. Now, so often as we tell the story, we think that the stone actually killed Goliath. The stone didn't kill him. The stone actually implanted so far into his forehead that it knocked him out. Goliath would have stopped, probably fell to his knees, and then fallen back. He would have been stunned. Now, if David had left him there, Goliath could have still lived. But David went and he finished what he had started. And at that moment in time, the Israelites saw what David did and they started running after the Philistines, praising God because God gave David the victory. Now that's good news. Not only was it good news for them, it's good news for us today. I want you to remember this. Remember that God uses small things to win the victory of the problems that we have. It doesn't matter how tall you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter who you are. God promises you individually that He's going to see you through, that He's going to bless you, and He's going to give you the victory because you are in Him. Now, as you go into the weekend, I want you to remember that. I want you to share that with others. And even more, tell yourself every moment, God loves me. He's seeing me through, and He's promised me the victory continually.